So, hello everyone. Welcome to the Dream Train Q&A Meet the Artists. I'm here with the cast and director and composer, not composer, he played the music of Back in the piece, which was brilliant, by the way. I really enjoyed it. When I was watching it, it was kind of like that really sort of nice experience where I was like kind of really, because I like to watch things without any premise. I like knowing what's going on at all. It's kind of like I like dive in and then I kind of spend so much time like, what is going on? What is and coming out of it afterwards and then sort of reading about like the sort of what the structure was like for you, like, oh, that's really cool and fascinating. I'll have to go back and watch that again. So that was a really nice process for me as an audience member. But it was originally done in 1999. And this is a comeback show. And Nick, I think we just kind of wanted to ask you to start with why this show in particular. Why did you want to retell this performance after 20 years?
It came about partly because of a conversation that I had with John a few years ago. I can't quite remember how many years ago.
Very lot.
Quite a long time ago. That there was a trust being set up. Tom McGrath died in 2009, and a year or two later, there was a trust set up in his name to support writers and artists of the sort that Tom was a great supporter of artists of all sorts, and it was to sort of try and continue that work. So there was a fundraiser for it at the Traverse, and different people were doing different things connected with Tom, and I decided to do the opening scene of the Dream Train. And when we'd originally done it in 1999, the music was all an existing recording. And as John was going to be there, I asked him if he would, because I knew that he played and loved the Goldberg variation. So I asked him if he would play the opening aria while we did this scene. So we did that, and we had like 5 minutes rehearsal, and then we did it. And a few years later, John said, have you ever thought of doing Dream Train again, but with live music? Because I'll be really interested in doing that. So we had a conversation about it, and I thought that'd be such an amazing idea. And Tom would have loved the idea of the music being played live, because then it really becomes part of the performance in a different sort of way. So John and I continued having conversations about it, and in the way that happens with trying to make things happen in theatre, it took quite a long time to actually get to be an actual thing, and then it was going to be an actual thing, a live event that then couldn't happen for obvious reasons. So we ended up filming it instead. And the idea was also that last year would have been Tom McGrath's 80th birthday. So it was to commemorate that, and that Magnetic North was 21 years old at the same time. So that's a very long and complicated answer.
I mean, it's a complicated piece, you know. It's really good. There's lots to it. There's lots of different layers. So yeah, it kind of makes sense that it kind of started with a multi-layered, beginning, right? But yeah, so some of the things that kind of popped out as me as the sort of questions that I wanted to ask. Just sort of right, the first thing that came to my mind is the music. Is that in Silence of the Lambs at the start? I know that's not about the piece, but is there a bit that he's listening to where he's sort of just chopped up a guy and he's like waving his hand? And I think that's the thing. Is that right? Is that in Silence of the Lambs? I don't know.
I know.
Let's Google it. I'm going to have to Google that. No. Silence of the Lambs, Bach. Ooh, here we go. Yes, it is.
Yes. Nice
So
one. I'm blushing at that. That was nice.
Well spotted. So it's the aria. So I didn't know that, because I can't bear to watch horror movies or anything like that, so I would never watch The Silence of the Lambs. I actually had to watch the Hunger Games Part 1 with my daughter this morning. I spent the entire time like this. So I can't, I wouldn't know. But yes, just Googling it, it's the aria, it's the opening.
Fair enough. I wonder if it's just my kind of, because it's such a strong piece of music. My first interaction with it is just like, right, horror, peril, there's something amiss. There's a superior force at work that I can't comprehend. And like, that was the kind of thing that was me straight off the bat when I was kind of like coming into the piece. Is that something? I mean, you could take anything from this kind of show, really. Just it's a really rich one. I did have a question that I was going to loop back to my bit that's just rambled off a little bit now, but I've lost track of where I was. I'll just jump to another question. Could you tell us a bit more about Tom McGrath?
I can tell you a bit, and John can tell you some more as well. Tom was he was lots of things, and depending on who you talk to, he's known for different things. But he was a playwright, he was a poet, he was a musician. He was also the first director of what is now the CCA in Glasgow, but which was originally called the Third Eye Centre when it opened in the 1970s. Tom, I think the euphemism you would use is that Tom had a very good 1960s. And he was in London, and he used to have amazing stories about all these. He was involved like in poetry readings at the Royal Albert Hall, and I remember him telling me once about he'd been at that first performance of Yoko Ono's piece where she got the audience to cut her clothes off her while she sat there. So Tom was kind of around lots of things happening in London in the 1960s while working as a writer and a poet. And then at some point, for the sake of his health, decided he probably ought to get out of London and go back to Glasgow. And he came back and went to university and ended up being involved in a lot of stuff, including writing a huge number of plays that were, a lot of them were produced at the Traverse in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And he had a play that was part of the International Festival in Edinburgh in 1979 or something, which had a cast of apes, and the actors had to play apes. And there's very little dialogue in it. And the script is almost entirely stage directions and a little bit of dialogue for the one human that appears in it. And I'm sure John will have more to add to that.
I mean, I only knew Tom actually towards the end of his life when he was in Edinburgh, and he was the Arts Council Literary Associate or something. He had a funny little office up above the Lyceum rehearsal rooms, and I used to go and see him there. And we just basically, I knew him through various things. Actually, the Traverse mainly, because his partner Ella Wildridge was literary associate there. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. Tom was very involved in encouraging a lot of playwrights, including Zilly Harris, who I share a surname with and was married to for many years. So she was very heavily encouraged by Tom. And Tom is interesting because his encouragement included the Monday Lizard, which turned into something else in the Traverse, but it was originally that open mic night for playwrights, where basically they just rehearsed readings of new work, and we set a lot of playwrights off on their first courses, their first initial work. But interestingly, Tom always played piano at those things, and he played jazz piano in the same way as basically he effectively taped his fingers together and kind of bashed the piano and made this extraordinary thing. It's like, that's quite intriguing. And then he and I had lots and lots and lots of conversations about music, and towards the end of his life, as he was, really not very well at all, we just exchanged loads of stuff. I mean, I would send him books, he would send me recordings. We'd sit and talk for hours about jazz or about contemporary music. He wrote quite a lot of librettos for operas and songs and stuff. And then, actually, I remember one very memorable conversation where he phoned me up about 3 months before he died. He said, "John, I'd just like to talk about the music for my funeral." I was like, "Oh, right, okay, Tom." He said, "Yeah, so I'd really like this particular composer who both knew Eddie Maguire to write me a piece. Is that okay? Yeah, sure, Tom, that's fine. I'll fix that. No worries at all. And he said, oh, well, can I have Bach Variation 21, which is the 25, which is the one from the Dream Train, the massive long one that goes on for hours towards the end of the whole thing. And I said, yeah, sure, that's totally fine. Anything else? Yeah, a bit more Bach would be great. So we had, and then when Tom died, I actually played for his funeral. And what was interesting about that was that, I played that piece, and I played the piece that Eddie Maguire wrote for him in 3 days flat. Just, because I went and found Eddie, said, oh, by the way, Tom's dead. Sorry to tell you that. Can you write him a piece? Because that's what he asked for. And he said, yeah, sure, that's fine. I'll write you a piece. So I played the piece, and I played some Bach, quite a lot of Bach, actually. And then actually at his funeral, what was interesting was all these playwrights came forward, David Harrow, David Gregg, multiple others, who said Tom was the person who set me off as a writer. He was the person who first off basically used tenor in my hand and said, you're a writer now, go and write me something. And I think there is a sort of unsung thing about Tom was that he really was the person who sort of set the kind of contemporary generation, or the contemporary generation 10, 15 years ago, of Scottish playwrights on their course. Because he's very free with his ideas. He's very free with everything. Incredibly generous man. And then it was running into Nick for the opening of the Tom McGrath Trust when he said, oh, could you play the piano for this opening of Dream Train? I've never come across Dream Train. And what's weird about that piece is because Tom wrote it to the Goldberg Variations, even though there's nothing about how the music fits to the words in the script, when you play the aria to that first scene, it fits. I mean, how? Because there's literally no synchronization points at all in there. There's nothing like normal sync moments. And it just works. And the whole thing just works. You just play the music and the play happens and it fits. Don't know how you
Yeah,
astonishing.
there were certain moments in it where I was kind of, because obviously I didn't read what it was about before going into it. I just kind of went in and was like, right, start a fresh page. But there were parts in it where I could feel my pulse racing quite heavier, and I didn't really know why. And then all of a sudden people were angry, and I was like, why people are angry? What words are they using? And then everything kind of sifts in and out, and it was really, really, really good. I suppose that kind of brings me another question that I had, right? When you're sort of engaging with a piece like this, do you like to know what it's like beforehand or afterwards? Would you rather sort of go in and be if you're an audience member for that kind of show, or say if you see something in a gallery and you haven't read the label yet, but you just look at the piece and then you're not sure what's going on, and then do you prefer to look at the label afterwards or beforehand? It's probably a question just for everyone. I don't know.
I think going into it, I remember sitting, I think actually we'd started rehearsals, and I remember sitting trying to go scene by scene and figure out which was a dream and which could be reality. And I know, John's face. Very quickly realised that was not going to be possible. And I am that kind of person where I feel like I need to know what's going on. I don't like to be lost in what's happening. And so I really tried to methodically work it all out, and then very quickly realised that it just wasn't possible. So yeah, with this one, I think you definitely just have to jump into it and not overthink it.
Yeah. It's a really rewarding experience. Oh, sorry, you were saying, Chris?
I think that's the beauty of this piece, though, that you watch it and you do just get as lost in the piece as we all kind of were finding our way with it as well. And I think that kind of losing yourself and not necessarily finding yourself again, but kind of going, well, what does this mean for me? What can I bring out of this story? And each individual having such a unique experience with the piece. I think that's what's really special about it. It doesn't lecture anything at you. It doesn't tell you what it is. And it kind of leaves it open to exploration and interpretation. I think that's really gorgeous and very smart from Mr. McGrath.
And also remember that the characters are also completely lost in it as well. I mean, it's not just us in the audience, characters are completely lost.
I mean, Kirsten's character shifts from one thing to another all the time. I mean, all of you do. I mean, who was Kirsten actually? Well, who were any of you when it comes down to it? I felt reasonably secure in who I was, but frankly, the rest of you, it was.
It was, we're all affected differently as performance by music. And therefore having a grand piano in the center and playing from the off, it immediately informs what you're doing. So when you were at home with your script, I kept playing, we probably all did, kept playing the music because it had, you know, they were interlinked. So I suppose maybe that's why we started to be, you know, in time with the music, for want of a better phrase. Or, yeah.
And how was it performing in that venue as well? Was it, I kind of got the vibe that you really enjoyed it.
Do you know, it was a bit frightening. It was a bit frightening. I'm always a bit frightened, to be honest, but it was a bit frightening in that it was a new art form. It was something that it was new art form because it's, you know, the Dream Train, but also because of the circumstances of how we were working and how it was going to be filmed. It was as though we discovered something brand new in this time of, you know, in these difficult times. And once you realized that it was something different, it was just great.
To give an example of that, it was really interesting watching the way that you, the thing that comes to mind is those scenes between you and Nick when you're in the same space, and the way the film works is it looks like you reach out to Nick or Nick reaches out to you, and you don't actually touch, of course. And that strange fluidity around it, so whether do you touch, do you not touch, who knows, is also sort of suits the piece rather well, you know. And just the way that it adapted to that COVID regulation world, it was kind of astonishing, I think, from my perspective, just watching you adapt your acting actually to that as well. It's really interesting.
Yeah. I want to do a big shout out to Emily, our designer, as well. I think what she did in that space that is essentially a hall to make it this whole world was incredible. And everything from, I remember Sean sitting in his chair for the first time and going, okay, yeah, I feel my world. And me with my typewriter, I was obsessed with this typewriter. And so much of those props and the costume, the amazing costumes that we got, it just really brought it to life and brought that space. The space had its own personality because of what she did with it and what we all could have found in the room. So big up, Emily.
Definitely. I think one of the things, Nick gave me a note at the start. He said the way that we're staging it is that really, what's interesting about the Goldberg variations is you can get completely lost in them as a pianist. Now I have to admit to myself, admit to everybody, I'm not really a pianist. I'm a trained organist. I find the piano a really tricky instrument to play. How hard you hit it makes it louder or quieter. That's a really strange thing for me. And also they're the kind of things you never finish studying the Goldberg variations. And Dream Train's a bit like that. It's never finished in that sense. You never find a definitive version of it. It's just the one that you did at that particular time. But the idea is that, me playing and these characters just sort of come into being around me. The venue, the setting, the acting, the kind of weird spatialization, the whole thing really suited that sense of it being very, well, dreamlike. It seems like an obvious thing to say, but it did have that sense of, I'm there and these people just appear, as I'm playing. And that, I think it's a very clever decision by Nick actually to make it work that way, because it means that you then have something that suits all these various parameters of working with your lockdown, filming, Dream Train thing, slightly dodgy pianist playing the piano, weird space, film it, it's also a filming version. It's really interesting from that perspective.
And I think seeing Nick's decision to see the cameras and to see the wires and to walk over them was just, I just thought that was brilliant. Brave. It was brave because you'd want to make it, it was a hybrid, and that was it was a brave decision, I think.
And it was a whole series of things like the pandemic, and there were various things that happened that sort of started to make it be in a certain way, but all those things actually somehow conspired to make it work. It would have been very different if we'd been doing, originally we were going to be doing it on the stage of the Lyceum, and it would have been amazing to do it there because I think the auditorium there would also have suited it really well. But actually there was something about that space and being able to put the piano right in the middle and for the cameras then to be in amongst that just really it really suited it in a way that those circumstances might not have suited a different sort of play. And I think, just picking up on something John said a moment ago about that you never finished studying the Goldberg variations, and actually the Dream Train is very like that, because obviously I worked on it first of all 22 years ago now, in 1999, and I was around Tom as he was writing it, and he used to email me scenes, and it would literally be dialogue, and it wouldn't say who the characters were. And it's almost like Tom kind of dreamed this play up and then sort of worked out how to piece it together. And there's something about that gives it its whole mysterious quality. And I think there is no definitive version of it or definitive answer to anything about it. As John said, very like the Goldberg variations.
Well, actually, something I discovered subsequently about the Goldbergs was that, now, I mean, I have to freely admit that the Goldbergs are deeply challenging pieces to play, and I am not, I'm not producing a definitive version at all. I'm some bloke practicing the Goldberg variations, and failing as often as I succeed. But the Goldberg variations were made for private practice. They were never made for public performance. The idea is there's this kind of myth around that they were made to entertain the Count Goldberg, indeed, the Count while he slept or didn't sleep. And they're insomnia pieces, really. But they're also, they're really designed for individual, personal, private practice. And there was something very interesting about working in a film setting where there is no audience, and you're very much by yourself doing this thing, and this stuff is happening around you, but you're not performing. You're somehow involved in some kind of strange private meditation that just happens to be filmed. And that's also integral to the whole thing. I mean, thematically speaking, Tom was unbelievably clever when you start thinking about it, really, that he really understood these pieces very, very deeply in a way that a lot of people just don't, actually.
And what were the main differences aside from COVID and it being filmed in terms of staging? Because you're saying that the designer Emily sort of gave it a whole new lighting cast. How was that different from the version that you did make 22 years ago?
I should also say that Emily designed the first production as well. So that
cool.
was part of the idea, was that the two of us would come back to it together. When we originally did it, we did it in Traverse 2, which, is quite a small space, but was also sort of appropriate because it's like underground in this strange bunker where you can't tell, it could be raining, snowing, day, night, when you're in that space two levels down under the ground. But the set then was very much framed around the train, and the train compartment that Laura and Chris sit in was there at the center of the stage, and there were all these different levels around it, and the Count's bedroom was up above. But it was all much more tightly compressed because it had to be. It had to fit in. And then what Emily is brilliant at is finding a visual thing that stitches everything together. And in that case, it was suitcases. And the stage was just covered in suitcases. And when the Count goes to give his lecture, he kind of walked down these steps which were made up of battered old suitcases and trunks and all that sort of stuff, and it was all held together by this image of luggage.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One sec, I've actually got an old. I'm not sure if I can show you. This was something I found in a flea market, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, but it's like an old trunk from a train from like the 1930s. It's just like, I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just interesting you kind of like talking about that, and I've got it just out the corner of my eye. It even says on the side, like Edinburgh Waverley 1937, 50 shillings paid, with a little red stamp on the side of it. And it's like, that's really, really cool. Not bad for £20. Yeah, what other questions did I have going? So for me, I was also thinking with sort of streaming sort of feels like a really kind of a cozy experience, like a really intimate experience to sort of watch a piece like of this kind of depth. You know, it's kind of like it's reading in a kind of sense where you just have to like go back to see different parts of it again and again. And this is probably like throwing it way, way, way back. But how was it? How was it drawing out these kind of like characters from the text, and sort of like and sort of knowing when, like, I suppose maybe it's more of a question for the performers as well, when you're kind of going through this, like at what points when you're rehearsing this do you know when to elevate or to sort of like reduce, or is that something that kind of like Nick's guiding, or is that kind of like you listen to the music by yourself and then sort of figure out on your own accord like how this character should be reacting to the music?
It was kind of a bit of all of that, really. You know, there, like we said, there's times where it is slightly more, you know, heightened, atmospherically as well. And a lot of the time we would sit and listen to the music and see if that would inform anything. And you know, you would get scenes now and again that just had just slightly weirder dialogue. Like, you know, there's parts where Kirsten's character would just blurted out, "What century are we in?" and stuff like that. And you know, those little things that you go, okay, we're going for that weird. We're going weird. That's and then we'd sit and listen to John play, and there would be a part where it speeds up or something like that, and it would just sort of inform us in that sense. Yeah.
I think we were really lucky to have that week at Summerhall and to just play. And Nick was so good at facilitating this space where we could just make stuff up and it not be right or wrong. And I mean, I think with Goldberg and creating that character, I had so many questions. I was like, Nick, what were this? What were that? And Nick was like, just try some stuff. And so we kind of went through a whole kind of variation of iterations of who that character is and how robotic they might be, or you know, how conscious and aware they might be, how much Goldberg is leading the Baron. There was, it was really good to be able to just play and experiment, because a lot of the time, especially when you do have a really short rehearsal period, it's just go in, get it blocked, get it done. But we actually spent a lot of time. I remember thinking, oh my God, are we ever going to get this finished before the time? Because we would just spend so much time kind of figuring it out. But actually, that was absolutely to its credit, because I think that's where we got that time to find out what the piece might be. And I think, again, the amazing thing with this piece, if we were to do it again at any point, would be that I think there would be a different performance every night. And a kind of really true sense of that, because there's so many different ways to play it.
There's always a different lead in a sense. Sorry. Go ahead, John.
I never admitted in rehearsal, I found your character extremely challenging because you were capable of playing the music perfectly every time. And I certainly was not. So it was always this sense of, oh God, there's this kind of perfect creature in the room that can make the music perfect, whatever that is when it comes to Goldberg, you know. And it's quite, I found that strange from Tom, because this idea that there was a kind of perfect version that the robot made seemed kind of almost counter to the way that he thought when I knew him. I don't know whether, Nick, that's something that you would say about it, but I never got the sense that Tom was interested in perfection ever. He was interested in kind of mess and things that broke, basically, as far as I could tell.
Yeah, absolutely. But he was fascinated by technology. He was always the first person to get he'd always get gadgets. He loved gadgets. And I think it was something, I think also he was he wrote a whole play, which I never saw it because it was from, I think that the 1970s or early 1980s, at the Travers called the Android Circuit, in which there was an android character which I think, from things Tom said, connected through to this idea of Goldberg as a kind of machine that played music. So I think it was to do. Tom had a fascination for the possibilities of technology, even though he was probably the most analog person you could ever imagine in many ways. But he loved the possibility of what technology might offer.
So he would have loved the fact that we had to film it, but we had to suddenly change everything, and and it was, I think, as an actor, it was so peculiar being the theatre performer and then the audience, because we watched the film, we watched the piece, and that never happens, and watching it and seeing behind you. John, maybe putting his head down or scratching his head, whilst he's looking at the piano, and all of those moments were part of it. I can imagine them. Yeah.
The other thing just to say about Tom, which came back to me just then when we were talking about all of that, was that real life he was very influenced by things that he saw or that happened to him. And as John said, he used to have this little office at the Lyceum. But he lived up in Fife, in a village called King's Kettle. But he would get the train in to Edinburgh every day. So there was something about the rhythm of that train journey, and which really informed Dream Train, of him getting used to making that journey backwards and forwards, and seeing the same things out of the window every day. And events. There's a scene where the character Tina, who she only appears once or twice, comes in, and it says in the script that she's got a thing she's looking at, which she's playing with and is fascinated by. And that came from a time that Tom saw this girl on a train playing with a thing, and he didn't know what it was, but he said her attention was so taken by it. He was fascinated by what it was and how this girl was reacting to this thing, that he put it into the play, the experience of that into the play. And he did that quite a lot.
Yeah, there's he said as well that he kind of predicted Alexa. I think I saw a little video in there that he predicted the Alexa device. He also definitely predicted the Rick and Morty episode where they're all on a train trying to escape the narrative of a plot that's going around in circles. Have you seen that one? Do you know which one I mean? None of you seen Rick and Morty? Oh, there's one. You have seen it, but yeah, there is there's one episode where it's I forget what the concept is, but it's a very, very similar concept. It's also a similar setup in terms of the circle that's on the stage. That's the device that they're caught on. Sorry, I'll just go through and have another look, some more questions. Yeah, I wonder if there's been much sort of research done into like the science of sleep. He said that sort of Tom McGrath is fascinated by science and technology, but I'm aware that are there certain frequencies that help you dream, that help you drift off? I'm not sure. Maybe John, do you know if that's the thing?
I don't. I know anecdotally. I mean, I have spent a night in the sleep clinic in Edinburgh. Edinburgh Hospital is like a major sleep centre, and I have been fully wired up, and I have seen my sleep patterns on a computer screen, and all the rest of it. It's quite a strange experience. It's almost worth having a sleep disorder actually just to go and have that experience. It's quite peculiar, including meeting somebody. What's really funny about it, it's like a little bed and breakfast inside the hospital, and you go in, and this is totally anecdotal and has nothing to do with this at all. However, in the mornings when you sit around having had your wired up night, and they feed you a bacon roll or vegetarian equivalent, and then you talk to everybody else, and there was one poor lady in there at the same time as me, and I said, well, what are you in for? She said, well, here's the thing, I'm in for my third time. unfortunately, what I tend to do is cook 3-course meals whilst I'm still asleep and leave the gas on. So it's, but I think, I mean, I know people who go to sleep with specific sounds in their ears. And I think kind of things like white noise really help. I personally, I knew somebody who could go to sleep to Bach. I find it unbelievably difficult to go to sleep to Bach because my brain just keys into it and kind of goes, oh, fascinating chord sequence, or something, and it keeps me wide awake. I do not understand how the Count had the faintest chance of going to sleep while this racket was going on in the next room, frankly. I think it's, that bit is essentially, I think he's just being kept entertained whilst he failed to go to sleep, but I can only imagine that it kept him awake. I don't think, if I could play a G continuously, that would send people to sleep or something. I don't think so necessarily. I mean, I don't know. Has anybody else got any sleep insights on this one?
I know that when my son, he's 16 now, but when he was a baby, I'd heard this thing about that white noise would help people to go to sleep, and somebody said, "Oh, yeah, you can blow a hairdryer or have the Hoover going or something like that." So there was a period in which we would switch a hairdryer on to send him off to sleep, and it did used to go to sleep. Whether it was anything to do with the sound of the hairdryer or not, I don't know. Although we did actually also burn out the hairdryer in the end, and had to get a new one. But it seemed to have some sort of effect.
Monotony. So my partner, she, her and her twin, they used to, when they were like being noisy kids, they used to stick them in the back of the car and drive around the block until they both passed out on each other.
You can get a white noise app on your phone now, though, so don't recommend leaving hairdryers on all night.
That sounds much safer. I should say we stood there with the hairdryer. We didn't just leave it. Any child protection people tuning in.
So obviously this piece as well was filmed in a very strange time, in a very like surreal time as well, where I was kind of like locked indoors. So how were the logistics in setting that all up from maybe more of a producing standpoint? I don't know if there are any producers in the attendee chat that might want to put forward a question into the Q&A. But yeah, just in terms of, how was it coming out of lockdown and working on this project? Were you doing a lot of work over Zoom, or were you in a space, or what were the restrictions like at the time when you were putting it together? Also, I think as you said, it was around September it was filmed, which was like a really anxious time. That was when everything was kind of going to shit again. So it was just like, how was it sort of being, making this piece within that sort of insane context?
It was, and in fact, there was a big change to the way you could do things. I think like the week after we'd filmed it, but we did do all the work in person. We rehearsed at Summerhall in the main hall, and kind of reproduced approximately the layout that we were going to film in. But we had all sorts of we had to maintain 2-meter distancing. We had the windows open. We had the doors open into the hall the whole time. We had to go in one and out the other. Louise, who was our stage manager, was phenomenal at keeping an eye on things, because we each had our own chairs and we had to carry around our chairs and put them down. And one of the things when you're rehearsing, like as a director, you'll go, "Oh, well, hang on, no, let's just move that over there," and you pick it up and you move it. And I would sometimes pick up a chair and then realize and put it down, and Louise would come and sanitize it so that it could then be moved by the person who should have moved it in the first place. There was a lot of stuff that was quite hard, and the thing like you couldn't lend someone your pencil or a page of the script. You had to have everything, even the props. The props could only be handled by one person. So there were all these various things, which actually was it was quite tiring at first. I think we gradually got used to it. I don't know. I might be imagining that.
It was weird constantly going against your like natural um instincts, like picking up, like if somebody drops something, your natural instinct is to go pick it up for them, and things like that. You would just hear Louise from the desk like, oi, step back. Or if we were getting too close while we were chatting, while we were having a cup of tea, it was always like, do you want to just take a step back? And it was so weird. But Louise was on the ball.
I know, I remember speaking to Louise, and I think her description was that before she even started doing her job, it was like she was driving at nighttime. That sort of feeling of driving at nighttime where you've got to be, and then you sort of start doing your job on top of that. And you know what it's like after 4 hours in the night driving, you're absolutely shattered. So yeah, it was. And also I think with pointing down my screen. So with acting with Nick, obviously, a lot of ours was about, you know, getting together in the apartment and all of that sort of thing. And you were having to always, fight against any movement even towards each other.
Well, that was it, because we had to move the chair. The chairs were taped 2 meters apart, but then we sort of said, actually, I think we need to move them a slightly further back because we have a tendency to want to like lean forward and stuff. So it was all those little things that became really tricky. And that scene where I'm on the phone and you ask for the phone, and we had to sort of style it out, and I kind of like go to hand it over to you, and then it swaps to your phone, but we cut, so you don't really see that happening. Yeah, just all of those little things that it did make it tricky, but it was just finding a way around it, really.
There was that thing with the costumes as well, where you have to quarantine costumes for 72 hours. So from the time that the designer Emily had the costumes, we couldn't touch them for 72 hours. So it kind of made wardrobe fittings and stuff really confusing. And then I remember, Kirsten, you like, something like fell off her, like her dress was like up in her knickers or something. Maybe it wasn't that, but maybe it was. But I remember like going to fix your dress and you were like, get off, like you can't touch me. And it's all these little things of, just things that we're so used to, especially kind of with costumes and with props, just having to work out a new way of working. But I think as well, we were very lucky that it wasn't a live theatre environment. We were kind of learning, and we could do those things like with the phone, where we could cheat it and cut in a certain way so that it did make sense. And if there were any kind of, because we filmed it in stages, we didn't really film it all the way through, apart from, did we do the master all the way through? Or did we always do it in chunks? Always in chunks. So at least we could kind of, it wasn't like, oh, we need to choreograph all the different props changing, sanitizing things. We could kind of cheat things a little bit, which is very helpful.
And was going into work on this piece sort of a nice bit of escapism from a collapse in reality? Like, did you find like it helped your performance as the sort of added pressure of everything that was going on? Was it an escapism, or was it like sort of, like, could you tell us a bit about that?
For me, it was both. I was so nervous. I remember being so nervous, being like, I don't know if I can remember how to act. I remember turning up on the first day and just being with other people, because it had been a kind of solid at least 6 months at that point of not seeing anyone, very much stay at home. And so to actually get out of my house was really bizarre. But again, such a blessing. And, thank you so much to Nick for having us along. It was an amazing thing to be a part of when nobody else really in our industry was working. I felt really lucky to do it, but also quite nervous.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like, I mean, yeah, I'm really jealous that that's the kind of like the place you got to go for your like, hour of free exercise. Get to the hub and listen to back from a contemporary musician and sort of weave into this intense script. And it's like, yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. I remember it being very joyful, actually. I mean, it was weird. It was freezing cold because all the windows were open. These people who I'm actually very fond of, you can't even go up and give them a hug. It's like, that was all very strange. But actually, being able to, like, every day go and play the piano and hang out with people and do creative stuff was an amazing release, because, actually 6 months before that, homeschooling, unproducing, running stuff, desperately dealing with furloughed people, financial car crashes, the whole darn shooting match. I mean, I actually, when Nick actually asked me, he said, "Right, we're going to do it." I'd actually just been pretty much in hospital, but I mean, not in hospital with fearsome dermatitis, and actually my hands were wrecked, and I couldn't actually touch anything or even type at the time. And I just remember thinking, actually, you know what? Let's do it. Sod it. It may be painful, but it'll be fine. And I think actually just that pure, let's go and do something, let's make something, at that point where everything felt like nothing's ever going to happen again, kids, was wonderful. Actually, a really, really wonderful experience.
And I think we were very lucky as actors. I don't know how it works with John so much, but I felt we were so lucky. Well, I felt very lucky to have music. Music's soothing, music's
well, I was very lucky to have actors.
Sounds like we're all just, but music, it does feed your soul. So having that on tap in the middle of your room for 2 weeks,
we'd sit having a cup of tea, and then John would be practicing the song for the next scene, and we'd all just sort of be sitting there nodding along to it, like, yeah.
And swearing. I did a lot of swearing, if I remember correctly.
A lot of swearing.
A lot of swearing.
We loved it. And remember, we worked that into one of the scenes as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're horribly hard. I mean, because the Goldberg variations aren't really designed to be played on the piano. They're supposed to be played on 2 mandolins, where your hands can do this, but actually now you're, legendarily horrible.
Fascinating to watch your hands. We were constantly just watching your hands doing all these incredible things. It was like, how are you doing that?
Yes, sometimes. That's what the swearing is about, mostly.
John goes, I can't really do this one all the way to the end, so I'm just going to work it to my character that I'm just going to swear at the end and just smash the keys.
Exactly. Yes.
My favourite bit.
So I see. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I swear. There's a point in the film where I just basically swear and give up, isn't there? I can't remember where it is. It's some horrible. It's number variation 5. Terrible piece. Terrible.
I'm gonna listen to that one. Variation 5. Cool. All right. Well, thanks very much for joining us, everyone. It's been really nice to talk to you about this piece. I'll definitely be sure to go back and give it a second watch. For me, it's definitely one of those where it's like, got to watch it again to sort of, sink into it a bit further. I can see there's just 4 people left in the chat now, just in case any one of them have any questions you want to submit in just in the last moment. Otherwise, we'll be saying goodbye to you momentarily. I should have probably lined up some back to play us out, shouldn't I, really? I'm going to have that in the back. Shall we have that for a sec? What was the bit? Variation 5.
Get your keyboard, John. Go get your keyboard, John.
Oh,
Alexa, play Variation 5.
Yeah, there's variation 5. Go on, do it.
Okay, right. I've got Barton. Okay, right, here we go. I've actually got it. Okay.
Oh, the tension.
It is. Now, whose recording is this?
Can you hear that?
No, it sounds like me playing it.
Was that working?
No.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, right.
Should I sing it?
Yes. Sing
How's that goes? It's a fast one.
Is that it? Is that the right piece? Have I got it?
No.
Nope, that's not it.
That's played very slow, but yes.
Is it this? Yes, I should. Can you see this bit here on the screen?
Looks like a scene out of Ice Age.
Yeah, but it's got these. Yeah, that's a lot of work.
It's actually quite slow, and also they have a double manual half much more.
Okay, thanks everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.